Today, I'm Manny Tejeda from Photocare. Thank you for joining us at Photocare for our Fujifilm X-GFX first look with the newest, hottest camera on the market, the Fujifilm GFX100S. We have a special guest today, Fujifilm X photographer and fine art aerial photographer, Dinesh Boaz, longtime Photocare collaborator, good friend of ours. And we also have Fujifilm tech support, John Haggerty. He's joining us in the chat and in the Q&A portal. Thank you everyone for joining us. We have so many inspiring stories to tell you today. Dinesh, he's been a longtime friend of ours here. He actually purchased his first GFX from us at Photocare.
Yep.
Shot many amazing images, LA, New York. We actually have a print of his on display in the store. And with that being said, I don't want to take up too much time with the introductions. Dinesh, take it away.
Great. Thanks for having me, Manny, and to all the Photocare family for featuring me and my work today. And also thank you to Fujifilm. I'm really excited to sort of talk more about my process to my work, but also talk about the camera, the GFX100S, which is mind-blowing because I started working with GFX cameras with the 50S, I believe, which Manny turned me on to, and that kind of blew my mind starting with that camera, and then now seeing the transition from the 100, which I still shoot with, to now the 100S. It's been pretty exciting, so I'm happy to be here to share about my experience with this. Just a little more about myself. So if you haven't seen my work on Instagram, it's Beats by Dinesh. You can follow me on Instagram on Beats by Dinesh. And as Manny mentioned, I'm proud to join the Fujifilm X photographer team, which has really opened my eyes to a whole new set of creators and images and opportunities like this to share more about what I do. Getting into kind of just a little bit more about my background. So over the past 4.5 years, I've really focused in on aerial photography and helicopter work. So all my work that you see is shot from helicopters. And I've been fortunate enough to shoot work across the world now. Most recently, I received an award for the Nat Geo Adventure Prize in 2019. And then also in 2020, I received the Outframe Award for a collaboration that I did with my creative studio, which was featured in billboards across the country called Out of Love. So I was really excited about that. Here's the image of the shot in Times Square. It was also across digital billboards around the US in December. I'm also represented by a couple different galleries, including the White Room in Bridgehampton, the Sorel Gallery in Connecticut, Robin Rice here in New York City, and McFine Art in Florida. I've also been part of many different charity auctions and donated lots of work to different organizations. And when I'm not behind the camera, I'm also creative director and co-founder of Future First Studio, which is a part of a digital advertising agency called Direct Agents here in New York City and in LA. And this is just some of the examples of shows and fairs that I've been in. You can see some of the print work. This was in New York last year. And it's kind of crazy to see people gathering in little galleries, and it seems like 1,000 years ago. So hopefully we'll all get back there soon.
I think that was the last time I saw you in person, was at that gallery.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And this was in LA, which just happened right before everything shut down in LA. So what I'm most excited about is recently in January in 2021, I've launched a photography studio here in NoHo, Soho, and hopefully, as things get better, I'll be able to show some of the work. I shared the studio with a friend of mine, David Ali, who also we've set up a printer here, so we're starting to make prints. We're starting to showcase the work and use this space to kind of collaborate and also show the world the photography that we're working on. To tell you a little bit more about my helicopter photography and just how that process works for someone that hasn't done it. So obviously, I spent a lot of time trying to find the right pilot and tour operator. So I think a lot about safety. And as it's the first question on everyone's mind is it safe? Like, how do you do it? I've heard so many things. Safety is very important. So I spend a lot of time trying to find operators that do tours, that specialize in aerial work, that have experience, that have been around, and that are not doing this all day long, and without naming names of companies in New York, I try to focus on people that are specializing in this kind of work. and then that are not just doing, tourist tours all day and packing the helicopter, but are really catering to this fine art kind of work. You typically have limited time. Helicopter flights are expensive, so you're working within a 1 hour to maybe an hour and a half. As in any kind of landscape photography work, there's always a waiting game with weather, elements, things that you want to
Yeah.
get right. You never want to go up when it's cloudy, rainy, windy, etc. So there's always a waiting game into getting that right time.
Hey, Dinesh, what time
Yeah.
of day do you normally go? In the morning, at night?
I try to spend a lot of time getting to a location maybe the day or two before and study the light. And so I get an idea of kind of what when the shadows are hitting. I talk to the pilots also of like what the content is that I'm shooting. So if it might be water or beach work, and I want it to be, action and things happening on the ground, I'll pick a day or I'll pick a time of day where I know there's going to be more people there. I recently shot some work, which is the photo here from Utah over the ski slopes, and I went at around 10:30 in the morning, and I got great shadow, great lights, lots of action on the slopes. And then the weather was safe. There were no real weird wind things happening in the air. So um, just like any other fine art photographer and a landscape artist, like I'm thinking about the light the same way. So I'll study the light and I'll plan the shoot that day based on what I'm trying to get and what I'm trying to gauge in the work. Like anything that involves aerial work, there's obviously things that are restrictions. So I kind of plan each flight and talk to the pilot about what I want to cover, and then come up with a flight plan. Each location has height restrictions, has location restrictions, has landmark restrictions. So you're kind of planning around that. And you always want to ask like, hey, I want to go shoot the Grand Canyon. Can I go right over this specific area? Or I want to shoot this ski resort. Can I go right over the main part of it? And sometimes I'll say yes, sometimes I'll say no. So you kind of plan your gear around that too. So I think a lot about telephoto versus wide angle versus like teleconverters. If I'm going on a shoot that has bigger height restrictions, I'll take a bigger lens. So thinking about those kind of things is important too. And thinking about the concepts and the kind of work you want to shoot. As Manny's been recipient of my calls many times, frantically saying, I need this lens, I need this
Yeah.
gear. What do you recommend?
Yeah.
So you kind of want to really plan that out. You want to work with as little elements as possible when you're up in the air.
Yes. Multiple batteries, multiple memory cards,
Yeah, I
sometimes
keep
a backup
multiple
lens.
Exactly. Maybe one backup lens. I've been lucky enough to work with 2 different cameras and have this lens fixed on the camera, so I'm not messing around with changing lenses up in the air. As you can see in the helicopter cockpit, it's a tiny space, so you're really working with a pilot that's next to you, and you're working in close quarters, and you're thinking about the shoot, and you don't want to think about the gear. So what's amazing to work with the camera like the Fujifilm system is I think very little about things going wrong, and I'm thinking about what I want to create. So that's kind of the basics in terms of preparing and getting ready for a shoot.
And a warm coat.
And yeah, when you're flying over in Utah, you want warm coat, lots of gloves, and maybe heat packs in your hands too. So that's kind of my approach to getting ready for a shoot. These are some images from different shoots, but the one on the right is from LA. So in November, as part of the launch of this new camera, I was selected to go out and shoot Los Angeles from helicopter. And so, I got to spend a weekend really kind of getting to know the camera, then got ready for the shoot and really kind of got set up with 1 hour to shoot new content to share as part of this camera launch. And so this is me coming out, getting ready and to go up. So I had 2 GFX bodies. I had the 32 by 64 millimeter, which is a go-to lens for me for like any kind of like wide angle, telephoto, zoom work. Then also the GF100 by 200 millimeter, which is great telephoto to getting closer in and getting that, getting some more detail on the ground. I brought the GFX, the 250 millimeter. It really is one of my favorite lenses when I'm shooting landscape on the ground. It's so stunning and beautiful, but in the air, it's a little tricky because it's a prime, like any prime, especially at 250. You've got to be pretty high up to put that into use. So it didn't really get that much use, but I figured I'd bring it up just to experiment with that.
But the compression that lens gives you, it's like second to none.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah. Especially like, if that's on a tripod on the ground, it's amazing. So I didn't end up using that, but obviously it's in my bag and something that I work with. And then kind of getting into the images. So in Los Angeles, obviously you've got cityscape, you've got beachscape, you have some interesting things happening in the landscape. So I kind of try to cover as much of those things to showcase and put the camera through a few different terrains to showcase the, what it's capable of doing. Unfortunately, in LA, there were very few restrictions, and except maybe out over the airport and downtown in terms of height. But as I go through these images, you'll see some elevation things. So I tried a couple things at 2,000 feet up over downtown LA. I tried something, a little bit lower over the beach side. So you do a lot of like sort of song and dance with the pilot, and you talk through each shot and each sequence. So when you're going over each area, you kind of coordinate what height, what angle, how you want the helicopter to turn. And so, when you have certain ways that you want to shoot and you get a good rhythm going with the pilot, it's kind of like your team, and you're kind of figuring out the shoot as you go along, and you kind of have an idea of as things start clicking and things start gelling, you kind of get a workflow that carries through that 1 hour or whatever time that you have set. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Hey, Dinesh, do you shoot in a burst mode, or are you shooting one shot at a time?
So I'm typically shooting low burst mode. I would love to shoot more one shot at a time and really frame the work. But I spend a lot of time framing and getting things set up, and then I'll take multiple images just so that in that short period of time, I might have 20 seconds to a minute over this little location here, or maybe and then I'm going to go around it again to get it again. So I don't want to spend too much time over each spot because that's just eating into your hour or whatever. So I probably shoot low burst mode typically. If I have more time, I might shoot, just singles. But the beauty about this GFX100S and going through the Fuji GFX system is how fast it processes the file. So you're talking about a 2 megapixel file, 200 megabyte actual file that you're processing in the computer. And I saw no delay even at low burst mode shooting through those images, shooting over location. And I've come through the GFX system, and I definitely saw that starting at the 50. You'd have to shoot a bunch of things. You'd have to wait. The camera would read it.
Yes.
Then you would do it again, right? So
Yes.
there was absolutely no delay in this. Going through some of these images again, also just in terms of autofocus and fast reaction, just amazing focus and reaction time in terms of just locking in different locations like this. And I can't zoom in here on this PowerPoint, but the amount of detail that I'm getting here is just phenomenal. And I'll show another image coming up where I actually do crop. But you can see that, going through different locations, I do a little bit of change in terms of ISO or in terms of shutter speed. I'm playing a lot with the aperture. It was a sunny day, so I didn't have that much to kind of force myself to change. Sometimes in a shoot, if you're going from like daylight to evening, there's a lot more adjusting and things that I'm doing up in the air. But I was lucky to have like great conditions to kind of work through the shoot with more focused on the aperture than playing with the ISO.
Yeah. What ISO do you normally feel yourself you're comfortable shooting at?
I'm trying to keep it around, 320 to 400 if it's sunny and nice out. I've shot as high as, in evening and night conditions on the GFX 100. I've shot as high as probably 2500 ISO and still got great quality print with little noise. So, I think the range is there if you want to shoot at higher ISOs and still have very little noise for these kind of files. So I think, it really depends on kind of what conditions you're working in. This is a great example of just the detail on the GFX 100S. So you see this shot here is just a kind of pattern that I got working off the sort of like the transport hub near downtown LA. And this is the actual shot. And you can just see that like I was trying to get something more, artistic to happen while I was up in the air. I had so little time that I ended up just getting this. Obviously, I didn't want all this noise here with the garbage trucks or whatever on the right and the housing on the top. So I got more of a sort of like abstract idea here with the colors. I saturated and blew out a lot of these like colors within here. So it works for me, and it just shows you that kind of detail that you're going to get with the file like this. That I haven't printed this yet, but I'm pretty confident that I can print this and blow this up and still make it look amazing. So just I think thinking about that, whether you need that like higher megapixel count is really just giving you more creative freedom to play with ideas like this. And so For me, I typically tend to shoot out of the box and not do a crop, but there's an opportunity to do that and get more experimental with the work that you're shooting.
I have a great question from Father Anthony. Were you shooting medium format before you purchased a GFX50S, or was that your first medium format camera?
That was a great question. That was my first medium format. For me, I think talking to you, Manny, like back in the day, I think medium format was always like this like secret world that you had to like have a key to get into, and you had to spend $20,000 to get something that you put on, and then another $20,000 to get the digital back, and then a mystery of what you're going to shoot. This was an entryway into medium format instantly. I like the ease of getting into it. It's obviously still a higher priced camera, but it's a much more accessible world.
Yeah. You're not mortgaging your house.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not mortgaging my house. It's like you're getting something instantly, changing the way you shoot, right? So, and the learning curve was so minimal, and until to this day, like between the 50 to the 100 to the 100S, the learning curve for me has been nothing at all. Like I've easily transitioned from each camera. Obviously there's little nuances to learn, but it was never like, oh my God, I'm getting into medium format, like what do I do now? Like it was instant. I hit the ground running. I was blown away by the resolution, one in the viewfinder, and just like kind of seeing the different colors and saturation from Fujifilm. But then two, I think the biggest eye opener was just like pulling in that file from the 50 to now the 100S, like pulling that file into, I work in Lightroom, and pulling that into Lightroom and exploding the raw file with all the dynamic range that it has. That was the game changer for me. So I haven't really looked back since I had that first email with you, Manny. So
it's not just a larger sensor.
So that's kind of,
the pixels are also larger.
Yeah.
So you have more dynamic range in,
right.
in those pixels. You go from 11 to 14 to 16-bit files now.
Exactly. And as a fine artist, I think it's a lot of it is like, what can you do with that color? What can you do with the dynamic range? How does that translate into print? And a lot of the print work that you see here, you can kind of see on the wall, is all shot on GFX systems. So I think, it's a lot of work that comes out of the box into Lightroom with very little adjustment. And then you can kind of like start getting more creative. And then once you start putting things on paper, or even on your social media, it's going to take you into like a different world of creator that I think most people are really, going to be excited about.
We had other questions in terms of in-body image stabilization.
Yep.
This is a great question because especially with something, if you're on a helicopter, it's a very violent environment. How important is that for you, and is it always on for you?
Yeah, it's always on for me. And that's the thing that I think, again, something that I didn't have to think about in using the Fuji system is the GFX system is not thinking about like carrying some giant stabilizer with me, or, getting to like more gear just to work in medium format. Cause that's kind of what, our predecessors would do, right? Like they'd go up in a helicopter, or they'd go shoot aerial work. They have like 2 giant stabilizers, and one for each camera, and they'd, and you'd have a lot of gear to travel with. The beauty about the IBIS system is you don't have to do that. And for people that are not shooting the kind of work that I do, and you're walking around in low light, I think this setup right here, like with the 50mm lens, walking around New York City at night, I've done low light conditions, low shutter speeds, you're not going to see any motion blur. And so I think from that standpoint, even for a landscape photographer thinking about, okay, maybe I don't need a tripod today and I can shoot this handheld, I think that's going to give you more options than you had before.
Yes, and if I remember correctly, the IBIS on the GFX100S is 6 stops, but that's mainly with the 80mm 1.7.
Right, got it.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, so I'm just going to circle through some of these images. If there's any other questions, we can talk through them.
Yeah. Another recommendation from John Haggerty was that the 35mm crop factor for GF lenses is 0.79. In case you're trying to calculate that in comparison to full frame sensors. All right, you have these great shots of LA, ISO 800, ISO 320.
Yep. Yeah, and you can see kind of the image on the right too, the amount of detail even in the background of that image.
Mhm.
There's so much color and range even happening. Like if you see that mountain range, you know, and I've done just obviously a little bit of color editing and stuff in this image here on the right of Griffith Observatory, but there's just so much detail going on all the way deep into the sort of mountains and hills that I think is something special about a medium format sort of sensor, that you pick up all those things, and you know, when you bring that into Lightroom and you start playing with that, there's even more things that you pick up and pull out.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, those are the images I shot from LA. I wanted to kind of showcase some of the work that I've done in print, so you can kind of just see some of the stuff that I've shot and had featured in galleries or in different fairs. You know, this is an image that I shot in Iceland, and I had it printed on a sort of chromogenic print. This was on the 100, the GFX 100. Some other work that I've done. This was in Jackson Hole, but this is a dye sublimation metal print.
So tell me, between shooting a 35 millimeter full frame sensor compared to this, how has it elevated the quality of your work?
I think in terms of just coming right out of the camera and into editing apps, I mean, I think there's just, it's exploded my possibilities, I would say. Like, I think, you know, getting into print work and getting into like large format prints like this, for example. So this is an image I shot in Israel that someone bought and it's in one of their homes. And, you know, there's just so much rich detail in there that I think for me, the elevation point is when a client sees the work and says to me, wow, you know, this is like amazing amount of detail. There's no question about the resolution or the quality of the print that I'm making. And then I think it's just the feedback. I mean, a lot of the work that I'm doing, like, you know, like this Iceland work, for example, like I've had people say, like, is it a painting? Is it a photo? Like, what's going on? And I think I never really had that before I started shooting medium format and GFX. And so I'm getting that like other rich level of color in there that I think I've never been able to do before.
I had a great question for you. Since you're shooting in pretty difficult environments, GFX100S, it has a lower resolution viewfinder than the previous model, than the 100. Did that impact you at all?
No, you know, in fact, I didn't even think about it until I think that was a question from, I think that was a question on one of these Q&As that I've done before. Like that was a question that came up. I actually didn't even think about that. Obviously, you know, it's a factor for people that are thinking about that as an issue, but for me, like in the workflow process, both up in the air and when using the camera, like walking around or on the ground or with landscape work that I've been experimenting with, it's not been an issue at all.
So what size prints are usually best for you? Like what do you normally print for?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the typical print that I'd love to make is like something that's huge and giant, but I think, you know, a typical buyer is buying like a 40 by 60 or a 30 by 45. You know, a lot of times you're working with someone that says, hey, I've got this wall like above my couch, or I've got, you know, you're working with an interior designer that says I'm furnishing a room and I need to put a print here. So you really work with the client in terms of coming up with the size, the presentation, the image setup. So as a photographer, I think a lot of it is like curating the work, putting together the portfolio, presenting it, but then working with the client in terms of like how that's executed and how that comes out. Obviously, like the sweet spot would be thinking about, you know, a few different sizes that you want to offer. But for me, a lot of it is like, I like to obviously like not go to below a 30 by 45 and say that like that's the standard of my work, so I'm going to present it at this size or bigger. The biggest print I've probably ever sold to a collector is at 48 by 72, maybe 54 by 80 something, you know. So like, so I obviously like those are great prints to make, but the typical buyer is going to have a smaller wall or smaller home that you're going to be printing for.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually provided this slide for fine art printing. I had a really good question for you on this one. So you said keep your adjustments to a minimum, always output raw to TIFF, but what's that? The make incremental adjustments when sizing up, 20%. Please explain that.
So yeah, so this is something I've learned from a few different photographers, and I also a printmaker teacher at ICP. And really, it's about, you know, once you got the output file. So I'll just quickly go over the slide. I mean, I think it's thinking about keeping the workflow simple. When you're making prints, a lot of people get really carried away with, I'm going to try like 20 different types of papers, and I'm going to try, you know, 500 different tests, and you know, and I'm going to narrow this down. I think going back to what I said, thinking about your audience, a lot of it is thinking about your audience. Like your collector is someone that either loves photography or loves art, wants something on their wall. They're not thinking, I need the most expensive paper today, or unless it really makes a difference on your statement and the way you present your work. Keep it simple, you know. And then I think streamlining your workflow, so thinking about like what that workflow is. And for me, it's like Adobe Lightroom to Photoshop. I like to make smaller test prints. So if I shoot a new collection, I'll try to make a test print of the best shots of that collection and try to narrow down what the best images are for print. Not every photo is going to print that you take, you know, that great. So you may love a photo on Instagram, but it's going to look not that great once you put it on paper.
Correct.
So thinking about that. And then I think going from raw to output TIFF we talked about. So in Photoshop, when you're doing image sizing, so let's say your file starts off, I think the Fuji GFX file is like at like a 38 by 20 something. I should know this, but it's at around like a 38 by 20 something inches.
Mhm.
So then I'm gonna go, when I incrementally increase that, I'm only gonna do that in 20% increments, because the idea is that you never wanna take that file and go from that to 60 by 60 or whatever, because you're gonna lose some quality adjustments on the way. And the principle is that like that Photoshop algorithm is going to be most efficient with the way it processes the file in those incremental adjustments.
Fantastic.
I haven't actually like done that extreme test to see if it's worked, but for me, like it's worked in the way my workflow, it's worked in the sort of end result of the work that I've done. And a lot of like talented, very experienced photographers have advised me to do that. So I've kind of like kept that as part of my flow.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think thinking about that in terms of adjustments, you never want to make that like extreme adjustment. You never want to push the file too fast. You want to go in that like sort of incremental sizing up. And then I'm sorry, go ahead, Manny.
No, keep going. Keep going.
And so I mentioned presentations. So for me, like my work is presented best in like a few different formats, but I've been doing the dye sublimation prints. So, you know, printing on metal. I've also made acrylic prints, not as many recently, but you know, where you make a print, then you put an acrylic on it. I work with a few different framers, and including Skyframe here in New York City. And then I was plan to mount the print. So you pick a mount that obviously works with the size of the image that you have. So you have a sinter mount, you have a dye bond. And again, that gives you like an archival way to present the work. It gives you something that hangs on someone's wall. It's not going to over time warp or anything like that. So I try to work with professionals that obviously know what they're doing on the printing. And most recently now, you know, you can kind of see this giant thing behind me, but that's a printer that the PhotoCare team installed in our studio recently. And I mentioned before, keeping options simple, without getting into like overthinking what a buyer is going to see, and what you actually can present is something that should be, you know, about the work, not about the gear or the details of the paper, unless that's something someone asks you about. I also like to, you know, I've been always taught, and this is something that I do, is every piece of work is limited in edition size. So you don't want to print more than a limited number of prints that you would attest to, and even maybe provide a certificate of authenticity that says, hey, this image is only going to be printed 1 out of 10 times. So if you bought, you know, the third piece of that edition of 10, there's only 7 left in the world ever. And you're agreeing to that as an artist. So you're setting your price at a certain point that you say, okay, you know what, after this image is shot and sold 10 times or 8 times, it's never gonna be sold again. Maybe there's a proof version that exists in the world that you could still sell, or maybe there's, you know, something that, so again, it's something that you're agreeing to as an artist, and that really helps elevate the value of the work, so that you're not doing like 100 prints that, you know, that are going to be out there. So you're becoming more of a collector's photographer than a commercial photographer, let's say.
That's great business advice.
Sure.
I had an interesting question from Larry Basaka. Since we're in the topic of printing, he may have missed this. So he may be wondering about the 35 millimeter DSLR style, so-called medium format killers versus GFX100S. Has Dinesh used smaller sensors and now really notices how great the larger sensor is? Since currently you're talking about the printing, I'm curious if he's printed from the smaller sensors and now sees the difference with the sensor, with the larger sensor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've printed off smaller sensors. I mean, I think, you know, this photo here of Manhattan that I'm standing over smiling excitedly about was on a smaller sensor. And you know, again, you're going to have to play with the file a little differently. You're going to have to make more incremental adjustments. You know, it's not going to start off as big. So there's nothing wrong with the smaller sensor. There's so many great photographers printing and doing all kinds of work on all kinds of cameras. So I think it's really about how your workflow is. I will just say that working with the GFX100S or the 100 or any of the GFX system, like instantly you've got a file that's going to look amazing on a bigger print. Like that's bar none standard. And then it's going to give you more options with editing, cropping, you know, dynamic range, color. We didn't even talk about, you know, like the film simulation modes on the 100S, like which I should go back to. But I think, you know, that's another element of creativity and another tool in your toolbox, like right in the box, with you know, more adjustments that you can make in you know, in a software. So I think it's really just a matter of like process or a different take on it. But obviously, for sure, you can print on a camera that's going to give you a size file a half the size, but you're going to start off in a more of a pole position per se to win, you know, with the bigger sensor.
I also will say this with a bigger sensor, you get more color gradations because there's millions of more colors on a 16-bit file compared to a 35 millimeter camera, which is tops out at 14 bits. But you also get it's a three-dimensional quality that you get to medium format that you won't get on a smaller sensor.
Yeah, and then some of the newer printers, including the one that you know, we just installed thanks to the Fujifilm team. I mean, sorry, the PhotoCare team.
Our own John Schlesinger, which is, slept, you know, over there.
Yeah, John. We spent the day with John Schlesinger, and you know, now we can output to 16-bit. So that is, you know, pretty exciting in terms of like the quality of prints that we're starting to make here in the studio.
Another great question. Are you shooting with the camera strapped around your neck or some other way to ensure you don't drop the camera?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I started off kind of like shooting with that around my neck and having like multiple cameras, and I'd come out of the shoot like with the big pain in my shoulders and neck. So now I'm using, I think, the rapid system. So I've got the sort of double camera thing that you've got.
I think that's the Black Rapid Yeti.
Black Rapid Yeti, exactly. So I've got two cameras there, and then they're both strapped in and safe. And then when I'm up in the air, like obviously the door is off. And so I try to keep things like not in my pockets, keep things out, keep very little things like that could get thrown out and be dangerous, and sort of just keep those cameras. And maybe there's a lens in the bag, a couple backup memory cards in my pockets, and I'm ready to go. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention is on the GFX100S, the new simulation mode, which is a nostalgic negative simulation mode, which kind of, you know, I was really excited about because it gave me this kind of like sort of cinematic perspective. And I think almost all these images were shot in that. I've always shot on Velvia, which is like my go-to simulation. But working in this new nostalgic negative is kind of got this like print feel from like the sort of like decades ago, kind of like old school feel, but it's got this like cinematic color. And as I mentioned before, what's great about the simulation modes on the Fuji system is you can put that into Lightroom, and I'm assuming any other editing
Capture
app
One,
where Capture One, where you can actually pull up all the simulations and scroll through them and edit them down further. So I think it's just like another way to kind of like give your work a different look, and then still have the option to make changes as you start going through the work. So I was really excited to kind of start playing with that. I've been shooting a lot of my more recent stuff on this simulation.
Yeah. I want to remind everyone though that even if you shoot with the film simulation on, you can always change it in post, and you can actually do a film simulation bracket in camera. So if you want, you can shoot multiple film simulations at the same time.
Perfect.
Father Anthony's asking, which GFX lenses do you use the most and for what subject matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I mentioned before, I mean, my go-to still is the 32 by 64, especially to kind of get that like detailed wide angle telephoto. You know, I end up using a lot of the zoom lenses because of the kind of work that I do. I don't want to be stuck on a prime and not have the options of like different ranges, different shots in each location. So typically it's the 32 by 64, the 100 by 200. If I'm not up in the air and I'm doing like landscape work or things on the ground, it's the 250 millimeter. And my recent favorite is the 50, which is like my go-to sort of like around New York City.
I want to be able to show this
I think like
lens. So
yeah, you know, and I think with this kind of, you know, body size and lens size and walking around New York, like this looks like any other, you know,
very small.
DSLR. Yeah, so you're walking around with a camera that no one really realizes you've got like a Lamborghini in your hands, you know, in terms of like what kind of power it has. So I like this kind of setup here, but I think typically I'm using a bigger lenses when I'm up in the air.
Awesome. Question, since you're up in the air, do you shoot with the helicopter doors open or closed?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's always open. I won't go up unless I can open it up because there's no glass, there's nothing in your view, and you've got this giant window to the world below. So yeah, so I typically ask for doors off flight. I've done work out of smaller airplanes, and we'll still figure out a way to like open the window up and then stick the camera out of that window. So typically, if you're going to do work like this, I would insist on finding an operator that can do the doors off. And you're usually just opening up like one side. So if you ever fly with another photographer, I would always ask for sitting on the left side, or you know, so you have two seats, two doors off, like front and back. You know, I've done many flights where I've shared a shoot and shared the cost with another photographer. So you are both on one side. So if a helicopter is making turns or going to a location, you're getting all the shots on one side. You don't have to go twice. And just like for safety's sake and simplicity's sake, like that's a better way to work.
Do you always shoot without a tripod?
Yeah, I definitely shoot without a tripod. I mean, I'm still trying to like figure out the right tripod. Manny's been helping me for a couple of years on that. But yeah, I try to shoot without a tripod. I think at night, if I'm shooting something at night, or if it's for a project, or if it's for a client, I might shoot on a tripod. But I typically am shooting work without a tripod. And I think, you know, with these new cameras, the low light system is amazing. So I mean, I think, you know, you're getting things at very low shutter speed handheld with the IBIS system. You know, it's pretty phenomenal. And even the lens systems that we're working with, like the 100 by 200 millimeter, and even the GFX 200 by 250, you've got OIS built into it. So I think that's something to think about as well, like when selecting lenses. So yeah, I mean, I try to avoid having to work with tripods when I can.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question, Manny, for Dinesh, if I could ask.
Of course.
In your years of doing this, have you ever lost anything? Like anything ever?
No.
Oh,
That's a good question. No, thankfully not. I mean, one, like you do a big safety check, so you'll spend, you know, with the right kind of helicopter company, they'll spend, you know, a good 10, 15 minutes talking to you about safety, talking about, you know, is there anything in your hands? Is there anything in your wallet? Is there anything in your pants? Because the danger of losing something is that it goes out of the helicopter and hits the tail rotor.
yeah.
And then you can, you know, you can have a disaster at that point. So I'm always very careful about that. And even like a hat like this, I probably wouldn't have on because it'll fly out. So, so you're thinking about, as I mentioned, like keeping very few things. Sometimes if people have like an iPhone or something, you know, they'll have a strap that's strapped to their hand. They'll have a case on it. So luckily I've not lost anything.
Okay. And also, I just wanted to ask you real quick, and I think I know the answer to this already. Yeah. With the GFX 100 and now with the 100S, and I don't think it really apply to this, but you really don't have an opportunity to try the pixel shift feature. Because I figured all that vibration and movement, it's probably not a really.
No, it's not. Yeah, I'm excited to use that, you know, out on the ground soon. But you know, you can't use that on the air. I mean, I think the pixel shift is you set it on a tripod and you run it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't have enough time with the 100S to really get into pixel shift. But now that I've been lucky enough to get one, I'll be doing that. So yeah.
We have two fantastic questions about the same
Okay.
topic. They're waiting to hear about video on the GFX100S. What are your thoughts on it?
I've done a little bit of video on it. I mean, maybe John can talk through more of the specs on it to share that.
Yeah, it's 4K 30. It's exactly the same as the GFX 100. The sensor and the processor between the two, the GFX 100 and the 100S, are exactly the same. 4K 30. I think it's 422 10-bit 4K video, but it's exactly the same. I haven't shot it. I just got my samples, so I haven't had a chance to really play with the video yet. But I'm really excited to get out there and try it.
And if you attach an Atomos Ninja V recorder to it, you get ProRes RAW.
Yep.
Perfect.
So look, the good thing about this is the first time I've seen a medium format camera that can actually be used properly for video. Before you had to do these insane rigs, you can actually use handheld or on a tripod, and it's not a problem. You can even run it on a gimbal, and you actually get quality medium format video. Let's see. How far have you pushed the ISO in the 100S?
I think, for LA, again, like I said, it was a brighter day, so I think it was probably up to 800. But walking around in New York and even LA at night, I think probably 2000 and up. And I've edited, and I haven't printed any photos yet, but I've edited and worked those photos. Again, just very little noise, easy workflow. And going back to the 100, I think it's like file size and file similarities. Like I printed some of those files on the 100 in much bigger files, much bigger prints. And the beauty about some of these cameras is that you can push that ISO up and you can still make a really strong image. So yeah, I would say it's probably worth experimenting even higher and making prints off of that.
Perfect. All right. Let's go on to the next topic. Durability and weather resistance. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as the way it's built and as far as the durability of it, very similar to the 100 in terms of just quality of build. And then in terms of weatherproofing, I think, I mean, it's a solid camera, and I haven't had any issues with it. As you mentioned before, like going up in helicopter, working in like high wind conditions, working between locations, having two cameras hanging off me and dangling around, like this is a sort of like a workhorse camera. Even though it is a small body, this is a camera that's meant to be worked. So I think, between this and the 100, without the hump on the 100, for me, this is the camera every time. And I think also, like, thinking about ergonomics and sort of like ease of use and workflow, like I really love the way that the sort of camera works between the dial on this side, and then also, obviously this is a one battery camera, but even working with this camera over the course of the shoot and preparing for the shoot in LA and preparing for, and having just one battery to work with, I had a spare, but I never had to go to the spare. So I think like this is a sort of like efficient camera, even in that working that low burst mode that I do, and not having to worry about like low battery life.
Yeah, what I love is that this now has the battery, the newer MP235 battery of the XT4, which gives you more battery life compared to the original 100 battery.
Right.
So Dinesh, is there
Dinesh,
more?
do you? I have another. Dinesh, do you miss the vertical shutter button since the GFX 100S doesn't have a grip on the bottom? Do you find it more awkward? Was that for some vertical shooting?
No, not really, not at all. Actually, no.
I actually just want to go over the ports and how the camera is laid out. So Dinesh, can you stop your sharing so I can?
Sure.
All right. So GFX 100S. The first thing you'll notice, PASM dial. Now you have C1, C2, C3, C4, and C5, and C6. These are customizable to whatever settings you'd like. Your top dial over here. Turn this on first. You still have the two dials over here virtually, in case you're, a classic Fujifilm user. Tap the button one more time. you have your histogram. A lot of people have been asking about this. When you're shooting still life and a lot of other things that are overhead, that is very handy. You still have your remote release over here. Dual memory card slots. Other side of the camera, you have your headphone and microphone jacks. This flap, you have your USB-C for charging and tethering, micro HDMI out for video, and your PC sync connection for for strobes. Bottom of the camera, you have your screw and the new MP235 battery. It's very familiar to X-T4 users. One cool little feature that I noticed today, that when you're shooting in this orientation, you flip the screen up, comes out a little bit more, so that the viewfinder doesn't block it. It's a great feature. You'll have your exposure compensation button here. You have your Q mode button here. You have a much better focus dial, auto exposure lock, your menu button, your display, and playback buttons. Very similar to the previous generation Fuji cameras. You still have your S, C, and M dials for focus. And you have your diopter adjustment right here. If anyone has any other questions on the physical layout of the camera, please let me know. Dinesh, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything else to cover. I'm happy to answer any of the questions that we have.
Yeah, we've actually gotten through most of the questions that were asked. John Haggerty, maximum flash sync speed.
1/125th, but it will support high speed sync.
Awesome. Oh, somebody actually.
One of my counterparts gave this a nice analogy in one of his presentations, so I can't take credit for this. He kind of put in GFX100S as if a GFX100 and as an XT. Oh God, let me start over. If a GFX100 and XT4 got together, they would create a GFX100S, because same sensor and same processor as a GFX100, but it also has a lot of the features of an XT4, like you said earlier, Manny. Same battery. The viewfinder has the same resolution as an XT4, as well as the LCD. Weather resistant, same battery, but the power and the resolution of the GFX100. And as we talked about earlier, to 16-bit. But if you're in the continuous shooting mode, it does kick down to 14. But as we were saying earlier, I don't think anybody would really notice the difference. So,
Peter McClellan was asking for the drive modes. So there's a drive mode dial button right here.
Yeah.
Tap that on.
And then go down to the very last one, Manny. That's where the new pixel shift feature is.
Yes.
Where you can use the camera's IBIS system, where you could shoot up to 16 raw images. And then you can use the Fujifilm Combiner software, which is available free off the Fujifilm X website. And you can merge those files together and create one 400 megapixel file. Yes. It's ideal for, I'm not so sure for landscape, because the camera has to be on a tripod. The camera automatically turns off the IBIS system. So, but if there's a lot of movement, as we were saying earlier, it's probably not ideal. But if you're doing macro work, still life, product, or food photography, it's ideal. And I haven't tried it with this camera so much yet, but with the GFX100, just the amount of detail that you pull out of objects is incredible.
Yes. Just remember, you're using the electronic shutter for this.
Yes.
Okay. So if you're thinking about using it with strobes, not at the moment.
No, I would, if anything,
maybe in the future.
Probably LEDs.
Yes, LEDs would be great.
Yeah.
LEDs are very powerful nowadays. So they've been working. Other features we had to cover. Oh yeah, so there's also a still and a movie mode. If you had the XT4, you'd be familiar with this, and that it actually changes the entire menu of the camera, so that you're not you don't have a combined menu that has stills and video. So it's much easier if you're only a still photographer.
Okay, right. Manny, I think there's a question here about Capture One and Lightroom. For the RAWs here, I get as at the moment, Adobe hasn't quite caught up yet. What I imagine when the ship date starts in a couple weeks, if they probably will be. But if you're there's a beta version of Capture One that will support the RAW files for the GFX100S. But if you download the Fuji X RAW Studio off the Fuji site, you could play with the Fuji RAWs.
Yes.
From the get-go right there.
As someone who uses both, I kind of prefer the colors and the way Capture One processes Fujifilm files better. And if you're in a studio environment and you're tethering, absolutely use Capture One.
Yeah.
Douglas Nygren, hopefully I'm pronouncing that properly. They're asking if can you do double exposures with this camera? Absolutely. It is the multiple exposure feature. Let's see if I can pull this up real quick. Under Drive, you have multiple exposure, and you also have additive, average, comparative light, and dark. So you can definitely do multiple exposures, but it creates a JPEG. So keep that in mind.
I'm answering the question on the focus bracketing option right
yes,
now.
please. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to show that real quick.
There's no way to show it to me without a subject.
Yeah. But I'm answering the question. It does offer focus bracketing for focus stacking. It has the traditional manual mode or the auto mode where you could select your 2 focusing points and the camera automatically figure out how many images to take. So that also is available.
Yes. For Damon Webster, we will absolutely have this camera for rental. Hopefully towards beginning or middle of March, whenever they actually arrive. Please go to photocarerentals.com for more information, or by all means, just call Photocare.
Just want to show off the printer that John installed here.
Okay.
And then, yeah, so my social media for anyone that wants to follow my work is Beats by Dinesh on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, Dinesh Boaz Photos. And you can see all the work on my website, dineshboaz.com. And you can also buy and see my print work on Artsy and First Dibs. So hopefully, connect with me and hit me with any questions that you have. I'm happy to answer them. And then Manny.
All right. So Fujifilm, if you're a first-time GF buyer or anyone just looking to expand their lenses, they're offering a new mail-in rebate program for the GF. Was it the 45 to 100, the 32 to 64, and the 110 millimeter lens? You purchase any GFS lenses from February 22nd till April 18th. You get a $500 prepaid MasterCard by mail. It will come within 4 to 6 weeks, but that's an amazing offer. And those are some of the most popular lenses, especially that 110. It's absolutely gorgeous, especially for portraits. Dinesh uses the 32 to 64, like most of his work at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would highly recommend you take advantage of that offer. If you go to photocare.com, you'll have more information. And there's actually a section on the website on the main page, so you can see exactly which lenses those are. 32 to 64, 45 to 100, and 110 f2. All right, so Fujifilm has been doing an amazing tech time series. John Haggerty is part of this. You schedule an appointment and you get a free 1 hour, one-on-one tech time with Fujifilm tech support. Like no other service would offer this. It's a lot of customers have been like relying on this when something that's beyond anyone at Photocare. If it's a really technical question, it helps. Of course, we'll be always available to help with any technical questions, as Dinesh has taken advantage of that program. But I highly recommend, and John Haggerty, who's been answering questions in the Q&A portal, he's part of that team.
I also put my email address in the chat too, Manny.
Yes, john.haggerty@fujifilm.com.
Yep.
All right. So if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at support@photocare.com, sales@photocare.com. My email at Photocare is Manny, Mannyt, @photocare.com. And just remember, we're going to have this camera at launch. Make sure to pre-order now. And we'll also have it in rentals. If you want to try before you buy, that's always a possibility. If you want to come and check it out, we'll be glad to have you here.
Yeah, and I'll just I'll add one last note for anyone that's listening still. I would just say like 2 things. I think one, like working with someone like Manny in New York City, I think is amazing because he's going to spend a lot more time with you to kind of get to know the kind of work that you do, and recommend a camera that really makes sense for you. And I've been lucky enough to work with Manny. 2, I think, the difference between Fujifilm and a lot of the competitors is that it really feels like a community of passionate family photographer, like people that really love cameras and love photographs and love making great images. So I think it's been kind of, for me, coming up through the Fujifilm system has been getting that first camera, the GFX50, and then connecting with Manny, with Brandon in New York, and then really like working hard and shooting lots of work and presenting lots of work and submitting to the Fujifilm Creators Program. I think Fujifilm has a link on their site where you can actually submit work to get showcased, and get to be a part of that whole creators program. So I would say I'd encourage anyone that's thinking about like making the switch. You're not just making the switch to the gear, but you're making the switch to the kind of like community, and think about that in whatever like sort of Fujifilm camera you're looking at. Like, take advantage of the whole program of sharing work, the social media aspect of it, the sort of tech aspect of it, and sort of having access to like experts like Manny and John, and really kind of like differentiating yourselves from like walking into like a big camera superstore and like hoping that you get the best deal. So I would say like think about that and like just keep shooting and hustling and working hard. Like that's really helped me get to where I've been going, and I encourage you to do the same.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right.
All right, everyone.
Great.
Thank you for joining us. Dinesh, you were amazing. John Haggerty, thank you
As
so
always,
much.
great
as
job,
always.
Dinesh. Great
All right,
job.
thank you guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.